The courtroom buzzed with the usual tension. Lawyers shuffling documents, spectators murmuring quietly, and the faint echo of a gavel striking from a nearby room. Judge Eleanor Hayes sat composed at the bench, her expression calm and measured. It seemed like just another day, another case, or so she believed. The bailiff called out, "The state of Louisiana versus James Anderson." Eleanor shifted slightly in her seat, her palms resting gently on the smooth oak surface. She glanced at the case file, assault, robbery resisting arrest. A familiar heaviness settled in her chest, another life caught in the web of justice system. But when the defendant was led in, the world seemed to tilt off its axis. The man before her, shackled hand and foot, wasn't a stranger. It was James Anderson, her James. Her throat tightened as a wave of memories surged. Carefree bike rides down the dusty roads of Hammond, Louisiana. Whispered late-night conversations beneath the magnolia tree in her yard. Childhood vows to always stand by each other. But the man in front of her now was far from the boy she once knew. His posture was hunched, his face etched with hardship, but his eyes, those deep, familiar eyes, hadn't changed. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly on the gavel. For the first time in her judicial career, she hesitated. The courtroom seemed to close in, the air thick with emotion. James looked up, his face a mix of surprise and quiet defeat. Recognition passed between them, but he quickly averted his gaze, bowing his head. The courtroom waited in silence. Eleanor forced her voice to work. "Mr. Anderson, you've been charged with assault and robbery. How do you plead?" His voice, rough and gravelly, barely carried across the room. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Her heart pounded. She wanted to halt the proceedings, demand answers. What happened to him? How had their lives taken such different turns? But her duties demanded professionalism. She had to stay composed. "Proceed," she said, her tone firmer than she felt inside. As the prosecutor began outlining the state's case, Eleanor's thoughts drifted. This wasn't just another file. This was James, and somehow she had to find a way to separate her role as judge from the girl she once was. The courtroom faded as she slipped into memory, back to a time before robes and gavels, back to childhood when she and James had grown up on opposite ends of Hammond. Not separated by miles, but by invisible social lines carved into the town. Her family lived in a tidy one-story house with a white fence. His home was older, worn down at the end of a dirt path flanked by fields. Their friendship had been unlikely, almost defiant. She recalled how it began, a random meeting at the creek where she'd wandered too far from home. James had been struggling with a fishing line tangled in the reeds. She offered to help. That small act blossomed into years of hidden adventures and shared dreams. "Eleanor," he once said while they lay on the grass, stargazing, "do you ever think about leaving here? Like really getting out, finding a place where people don't stare just because we're sitting together?" She laughed then, brushing it off. But James had been serious. Even as a child, he saw how the world worked, and how it didn't always make space for people like him. Despite the whispers and disapproval from both their communities, their bond only grew. But the weight of the world bore down on them, and eventually it crushed what they had. It ended the summer before high school. Her father caught them on the porch. His voice had been cold, firm. "Eleanor, get inside." She'd hesitated, looking to James, who stood frozen. "Go on," he'd whispered, defeated. "I'll see you around." But that was the last time. Her father forbade her from seeing James again, and not long after, his family moved away. Eleanor buried herself in schoolwork, chasing big dreams that took her far from Hammond. She studied law, pursued justice, but she never forgot the boy who'd shown her what courage really meant. Now, as she sat in judgment, she wondered what had happened to him after that day. His record showed minor run-ins with the law, petty theft, loitering. Nothing that pointed to violence. But what could a rap sheet really say about someone's life? The prosecutor's voice yanked her back. He was describing the incident. James was accused of assaulting a convenience store clerk during a robbery in Baton Rouge. The clerk sustained minor injuries. The cash drawer had been emptied. James was arrested nearby, allegedly still carrying the stolen money. Eleanor studied him again. His body was slouched, hands folded, face unreadable. Was he truly guilty? Or was there more to this than what the charges suggested? When court recessed for lunch, Eleanor retreated to her chambers. Her assistant, Margaret, entered, concern in her eyes. Judge Hayes, are you all right? You seemed a little distracted. Eleanor paused. Should she tell Margaret? Would it be improper to admit she knew the accused? Instead, she replied quietly, I'm fine. Just have a lot on my mind. But she wasn't fine. Not even close. When the past she worked so hard to forget suddenly sat just a few feet away awaiting her verdict, Judge Eleanor Hayes could feel the weight of it all. The courtroom was packed as the trial resumed. Journalists scribbled furiously, the clerk shuffled papers, and the prosecutor, a sharp-featured man named Richard Powell, stood ready to make his argument. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Powell began, his tone crisp and authoritative. This case centers on violence. It's about a man who entered a convenience store and, without warning, assaulted an innocent employee before making off with the contents of the register. The evidence will prove beyond a doubt that James Anderson is responsible. A tight knot formed in Eleanor's chest. Powell spoke as if James were just another statistic, another case file, devoid of humanity. Her eyes drifted toward James, who remained still, his gaze fixed on the table in front of him. Then the defense attorney, Lisa Porter, rose to give her opening remarks. Young but self-assured, her voice filled the room with quiet conviction. The prosecution wants you to believe this case is simple, she said, but it isn't. My client, James Anderson, has maintained his innocence from day one. We'll demonstrate that there's more to the situation than meets the eye and that the assumptions made during the arrest do not withstand deeper examination. The first witness was the store clerk who had been working the night of the alleged robbery. He testified that a man resembling James had entered the store, argued with the cashier, then jumped the counter. His story was detailed, but something about it felt overly polished, like a script. Lisa's cross-examination was methodical. Mr. Chambers, you mentioned the attacker was wearing a red hoodie, correct? Yes, the witness replied. Did you see his face clearly? Not exactly. It was dark, and he had the hood pulled up. Lisa paced slowly. So, you're admitting that you couldn't positively identify the individual? Well, no, not for certain. No more questions, she said, cutting him off cleanly. Eleanor noticed a subtle shift in James's posture. His shoulders straightened slightly, as if he'd found a sliver of hope. Next, the prosecution presented a surveillance video from the store. The footage, grainy and poorly lit, showed a hooded figure entering, moving swiftly, and reaching over the counter before disappearing from view. Powell insisted the person was James, but the video lacked enough clarity to confirm anything definitively. Eleanor watched the screen intently. Was it really him? The footage ended abruptly, leaving troubling gaps in the story. James's defense rested on an alibi. He claimed he had been walking home from a friend's house during the time of the crime. But the friend refused to testify, fearful of backlash from the neighborhood. Lisa argued that a scared witness didn't prove guilt. Still, Eleanor could sense the jury's doubt growing. As the trial continued, Eleanor felt the crushing burden of her role. She was supposed to be unbiased, a symbol of justice. But how could she be when every glance at the defendant reminded her of a different time, when he was just a boy and her best friend? Now he was a man fighting for his future, and she was the one deciding it. When the court adjourned for the day, Eleanor lingered, her fingertips tracing the edges of her gavel. She wanted to speak to James, to ask him what had happened, but that would be a breach of protocol and could jeopardize both the case and her career. As James was let out in chains, her certainty faltered. She'd always believed in the justice system, its ability to uncover the truth. But for the first time, she questioned whether the truth was ever truly within reach. As the trial approached the turning point, a low murmur filled the courtroom. Now it was the defense's turn. Lisa Porter called her key witness Officer Daniel Harris, the arresting officer. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. If there were any flaws in the prosecution's case, they might begin to surface now. Officer Harris, a large man with a gruff demeanor, took the stand. Lisa approached him calmly. Officer Harris, she began. You were the one who detained Mr. Anderson, correct? Yes, he responded curtly. In your report, you stated he was found walking about 2 blocks from the store at the time. Is that right? Yes. And what made you believe he was the perpetrator? Harris shifted slightly. He matched the description, black male, mid-40s, wearing dark clothing. Lisa raised an eyebrow. Dark clothing? But wasn't the suspect in the surveillance video wearing a red hoodie? He hesitated. Yes, But he could have taken it off. Lisa stepped closer. Could have. Did you or anyone from your department search the area for the hoodie? No. There wasn't time. We detained him quickly. So, just to be clear, Lisa pressed, you arrested my client based on a vague description and no physical evidence tying him to the scene? The silence that followed said more than any response could. Eleanor's gaze flicked toward the jury. A few looked uncertain, exchanging glances, but Lisa wasn't finished. Officer Harris, do you recall what Mr. Anderson said when you arrested him? He protested, said he was innocent. And did you investigate that claim at all, or did you assume guilt from the beginning? The buried memories Eleanor tried so hard to forget now sat only feet away, waiting for her judgment. The courtroom was crowded as the trial resumed, reporters jotting down notes, papers rustling, and the prosecutor, a sharp-featured man named Richard Powell, preparing to present his argument. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Powell began, his tone unwavering, this case is about violence. A man entered a convenience store and, without warning, attacked an innocent employee before fleeing with the cash drawer. He continued, insisting the evidence would clearly show James Anderson's guilt. Eleanor felt a tightness in her chest. Powell's tone was cold and procedural, as though James was just another name on a list. She glanced toward James, who sat motionless, his eyes fixed downward. Then the defense attorney, Lisa Porter, stood to deliver her opening. She was young, but composed, her voice firm and sure. The prosecution wants you to believe this case is cut and dry, she said, but it's not. My client, James Anderson, has consistently asserted his innocence. We will show that the assumptions made the night he was arrested do not hold up under close inspection. The first witness, a store employee, testified about the night in question. He described someone matching James's description entering the store, arguing with the cashier, and then jumping over the counter. His account was detailed, but Eleanor sensed it had been practiced. Lisa's cross-examination was precise. Mr. Chambers, you testified that the attacker wore a red hoodie, is that right? Yes, the witness answered. Did you see the person's face clearly? Not really, it was dark and the hood was up. So to be clear, Lisa continued, you can't say for sure who it was? No, he admitted. No further questions, Lisa said, stepping away. Eleanor noticed James sit a little straighter, as though a tiny sense of hope had returned. Next came the surveillance footage. The video, blurry and poorly lit, showed a person in a red hoodie entering the store, moving quickly toward the register and then vanishing off camera. The prosecution claimed it was James, but the image quality made it hard to tell. Eleanor watched closely. Could that really be him? James's defense hinged on his alibi. He said he'd been walking home from a friend's house at the time, but the friend refused to testify, citing fear of retaliation. Lisa argued that his silence didn't make James guilty, but Eleanor noticed doubt creeping into the jury's faces. With every passing moment, Eleanor felt the burden of her role. She was meant to remain neutral, to represent fairness. But how could she, when this trial echoed the ghost of her childhood, when the man in chains was once the boy she trusted most? As the court recessed for the day, Eleanor lingered. She longed to ask James what had happened, but she couldn't. Speaking to him outside of the proceedings would break every rule. She watched as he was led away, chains clinking. She still believed in the justice system, but for the first time, she questioned whether it could truly uncover the truth. When the trial resumed, the courtroom hummed with tension. It was the defense's turn, and Lisa called a surprising witness, a forensic analyst who had examined the surveillance video. The analyst testified that based on the figure's size and build, there was no way to conclusively identify the person as James. Worse, the timestamp on the footage had been altered, casting doubt on its reliability. The prosecutor dismissed the testimony as speculation, but the jury looked shaken. Doubt had taken root, and Eleanor could feel its presence. Then James took the stand. Lisa had warned him of the risks, but he insisted on speaking. Chains clinking softly, he approached the witness box. His voice was quiet, but filled with raw emotion. I've made mistakes, James began, addressing the jury. I've taken bad turns and trusted the wrong people, but I didn't do this. That night, I was just walking home. The police didn't ask. They just decided I matched the description. His voice trembled as he went on. My whole life, I've been fighting just to be seen as more than what people expect. I'm tired. I just want the truth to count for something. Eleanor's throat constricted. His words weren't just a defense, they were a cry for dignity. She looked at the jury. Faces were etched with emotion, conflict, sympathy, uncertainty. This was no longer a matter of just evidence. It was a test of conscience, a battle against bias. She knew her duty. She couldn't guide the jury, but she could shape justice with her final word if their verdict left room for interpretation. The last day of the trial arrived. Closing arguments were sharp and strategic. The prosecution leaned on circumstantial proof, urging the jury to trust the system. Lisa, meanwhile, asked him to look deeper, to see the humanity in the man before them and the flaws in the case. Eleanor listened without expression, but inside her thoughts spun. The system she'd devoted her life to now felt fragile. She couldn't change the jury's verdict, but she could uphold its meaning. The jury deliberated for hours. People moved in and out of the courtroom, whispering and stretching as they waited. James remained still, his hands clenched. He hadn't looked at Eleanor since the first day. She understood why. What could she say that would make any of this right? At last, the bailiff returned. The jury had reached a decision. Everyone fell silent. A juror stood, paper trembling in her grip. In the case of the state of Louisiana versus James Anderson, we find the defendant, the paws stretched painfully. Not guilty. Gasps and murmurs erupted. A few even clapped. Eleanor brought down her gavel. Order in the court, she said firmly. James slumped slightly, as if a great weight had been lifted, but his face stayed guarded. He had his freedom, but it had clearly come at a price. The jury has rendered its verdict, Eleanor said. Mr. Anderson, you are free to go. This court is adjourned. As the room cleared, Eleanor stayed behind. She watched James sign his release paperwork. For a moment it seemed he would leave without speaking, but then he turned toward her. Only a few clerks remained. Margaret was packing files. James approached the bench, his expression guarded. You don't owe me anything, he said softly. But I gotta ask, why didn't you say anything? You knew me. Eleanor's voice caught. I couldn't. If I did, it could have compromised the case. James studied her face. There was hurt there, but also understanding. Fair, he repeated, his tone dry. That's the thing. The world's never been fair. Not for people like me. She nodded, her gaze lowering to the bench. You're right. I wish I had done more back then. I wish I could have done more now. James sighed. The tension seemed to ease. We were just kids. Didn't know any better, but you know better now, don't you? I do, she replied firmly. And I'm sorry. He nodded faintly and turned away, walking out of the courtroom with steady steps. Eleanor remained seated, the silence around her loud with reflection. She had followed the law, but the trial had revealed something deeper. Justice wasn't just verdicts. It was the long, slow struggle to fix a broken system. As she stepped outside into the fading sunlight, shadows stretching across the courthouse steps, Eleanor made a silent vow. She couldn't undo the past. But from now on, she would fight for more than appearances, for a justice that truly meant something. It wouldn't be easy. It might never be enough, but she owed it to James and to herself to try.